Hello, Jaime from Inky&Scrappy back with my Magic Circle Window interactive card for Craft Roulette number 220. If you haven't played Craft Roulette, go check out Mary Fun Gun's Craft Roulette live on YouTube. She also has a website and a Facebook group. It's a lot of fun. So anyways, back to the card. So I'm starting with that Magic Picture Window Circle interactive die. I will list all of, well, everything that I can remember that I used down in the description box below. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So for this one, I am using MFT's Touchdown stamp set. Of course, it's going to be a football card. So this project was supposed to be a card for a dude. And so, of course, I was like, oh, I'll make my dude, which is my youngest son's birthday card. It was supposed to be his graduation card, and then I ended up switching it to birthday, which is coming up this coming weekend. So it, you know, time-wise, this video works. Yeah. I also made sure to stamp some masks on some Avery removable adhesive sheet, which I ended up hand cutting out because my brother's scan and cut mat was full of cut out words and letters for his scrapbook that I was only 15 years behind for his graduation party at the end of June. So I'm working on the inside circle for this Magic Window Circle interactive. So to start with, my pieces of paper here are 5 1/4 by 5 1/4. I did end up, that's the smallest that you should probably go with for this interactive. So this top piece here, which doesn't really cut out the circle, it cuts out the slits for the circle and then the path that tab is going to slide through. So the front panel here had to be kind of exactly where everything needed to be placed. Now keep in mind with this one, there's a hole in the middle. So there's a way around that so you don't have a hole in the middle of your card. It comes with kind of a paper brad and then a paper washer. But it also comes with a circle to go on top of that to kind of seal everything together and make it work. But you have a little bit of leeway on what you can do with that top piece. So I'll show you how I kind of hid that in this one as we get going. I was kind of thinking about putting the football on it for a little bit, and then I changed my mind, as I do. So for this one, I'm going to do some masking and some ink blending. Now, this ended up being a lot more, shall I say, time intense when it came to my actual masking. Because I needed my lines, I wanted to make a football field, and one of the parameters was a chart. And so I figured, well, a football field is like a chart because it's got grid lines and numbers. So that was kind of where I was going with this one. If I wouldn't have had to add this step, I might not have added the grid lines. It was probably the hardest in lining it up, at least in the overall card. So I did not need my grid line on the top one because of course the top one is going to get cut out, and so you're not going to see all of that. But for this one, because I just had grabbed scrap paper on my desk. I'd been working on scrapbook pages. I had white scraps everywhere. And so I was like, I grabbed 2, not really paying attention, and I probably should have paid a little bit better attention and grabbed 2 of the same types of card stock for this one. So my ink blending was, shall I say, it didn't match. Like, you can tell in the final card, I could tell while I was doing it that it wasn't going to match. One of them was just sucking the ink in more. One of them was definitely smoother. And so that is something I would say to pay attention to if you're going to make a card like this. Yeah. Especially if you're ink blending on it. I don't think it's as big of a, you know, it's also makes a little bit sense. I decided to go with my alcohol markers here instead of ink blending on the top. Why didn't I ink blend on the top? Because, yeah, that whole not having my cutting mat for my brother's scan and cut, I was like, you know, I'll just ink, you know, marker it. So I used some dark blue-gray inks from my Ohuhu marker line and just kind of colored where I needed to. Now on this piece, of course, this is the one that's getting cut out, so I did not go all the way to the top and or the corners. I'd already kind of marked off where I needed to color to, so I knew I was within those lines. I hope that makes sense. Then I made my little character here match each other. They're not actually the same animal, I don't think, but I think it worked because they're in a different position, so you can't really tell. This one doesn't really have a tail on the front of him, so you can't really see that. His ears are a little bit different, but I figured his placing is a little bit different. So as long as I colored them the same, I figured nobody's really going to know that they're not supposed to be the same animal. Yeah. So I just pulled in a bunch of different browns using my Ohuhu markers. And then, of course, for my stadium seating here, I did bring in a bunch of different skin tones and kind of made sure that my seats had the same people sitting in them for both shots or pictures, I guess. Yeah. And then, of course, coloring in the rest of the stadium to match. And you see what I mean when I use exactly the same colors, but the paper definitely made each color a little bit different on them. And so that is something I would say definitely pay attention to. Now this was probably the most, shall I say, nerve-wracking, the hardest part of the whole thing was making sure that my lines were going to match up here. I did an okay job. I'm not going to say it was perfect. It turned out better than I anticipated. We'll go with that one. So I cut my first panel, or my top panel first, and then I'm coming in with this one. Now, keep in mind that the little arrows on this one help you to line up where your placement is going to be. So your arrows should kind of sit exactly on top of each other for both of these panels. Now, to get them to line up, you know, properly, I was trying to make sure that I was going to get them. This was the only way to figure out how it was going to line up. Maybe if I'd have cut the inside panel first, I could have pulled that one. I don't know. It ended up working out okay. It just took me a lot of time to make sure that I was where I thought it was going to be. I kind of lined up the yellow lights from the, you know, what is that place called? The press box. And the lights, and I hoped for the best. Were my lines exactly on? I don't know. Yeah, so here was me like, I don't know. It's still not like, because I knew that parts of it weren't going to actually cut out, and parts of it weren't going to be shown, so I wanted to make sure that it lined up as close as possible. Now, there's, you know, I had options if it was totally off. I would have probably brought in a lot of black blending ink and kind of blended in the outside. So here was kind of the real, yeah, is it going to work or isn't it going to work? So I did come in at this point and bring in my text for this one. I probably should have maybe possibly put my little player dude up there to make sure, because I hadn't exactly decided where I was putting everything at this point. I maybe should have figured that out beforehand. I probably would have lowered the text a little bit, maybe centered it on the bottom of that circle instead of putting it where I did. But, you know, I wasn't thinking that totally through. So I did use a white, I think it's like a chalk marker. It kind of whitens as it dries. I didn't want it to be a stark number. I wanted it just kind of be a light, you know, just an added touch to the backdrop. I didn't want it to stick out like a sore thumb. Now, I do suggest coming in with an anti-static powder tool and powdering everything well. This helps dry any of that ink that might not be dry yet, because it's going to help it not stick. So if it sticks, it doesn't work the greatest. So I've learned that powdering it and powdering it well helps the mechanism work a lot better. Now, the other thing with this one is you're going to start with your tab all the way over onto the right-hand side, and then you work them through, and you'll get this perfect star on the front and on the back. I put a little teeny tiny drop of glue on each one of those star points, and then I put that paper circle on there, or that paper washer on there, and then of course folding this paper brad into, to make it go through. And then of course on the top end here, we're just going to add the 2 little dots, and then I'm going to add the circle. Now, I maybe shouldn't have done the full circle on this one. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know. I probably should have cut it down a little bit, but you really do almost need that whole circle. I probably should have made that whole circle a little bit darker green, so if anything stuck out, it would blend into that background a little bit more. Also, you wouldn't have had to do a character on there if you'd have made sure that where that circle was going to sit was just going to be a solid green. Probably would have helped too. Anyways, so I'm just working it to get it to move. So a lot of times I start with the actual pull tab piece, but I come in and I actually I grab one of those little fins, I guess, because it's kind of like a fan blade. So I grab one of those fan fins and kind of work them through that way. It usually sticks in 1 or 2 spots, but I find by doing it that way, it works just a little bit better. So here's me trying to make that circle greener. Yeah, I did end up just bringing in my dye ink here and just kind of chunked it on there. It was what it was, right? Yeah. So this is where I'm like, I should have definitely moved that sentiment down just a little bit more. Yeah. That's why I said I probably should have figured out my layout before I got this far. Yeah. It is what it is. So the thing with this one is, so that middle piece, if you glue it onto your card front, do not put glue on the little paper brad on the back side, because it'll allow whatever you put on that circle to rotate. And so it was fun to put the opposing team on that little circle, so it kind of looks like maybe he tripped or he missed his tackle, and so he's kind of laying on the back side. I thought about adding in some more characters and or things on this one, but ultimately I decided it would probably mess with the mechanism and catch, and I didn't want to have anything catch. So I just brought in the MFT action stamps there to add slide onto the tab, so he knows what to do with that one. Now I cut my card base 5.5 by 5.5. My card front is not an actual square. I did not realize that until, right about at this point. Now I had also thought about doing a scoreboard, because I think that would have also worked for the chart. I think it was chart or grid. I'll go over them at the end. Anyway, so I cut my card base at 5.5 by 5.5, and of course it ended up being 5.25 wide instead of 5.5. So I just ended up trimming off a little bit there so I could just mount this onto my card base. So to mount it, I used some thin 1/8 inch foam strips, and then made sure to kind of go around where that mechanism is going to move on the bottom there, because I didn't have a lot of room. So just making sure not to hinder the movement of the actual pull tab so it moves freely. Now at this point, once I had it on here, I decided he was just in the way for my sentiment, and I didn't like that my sentiment was covered up. So, card surgery, it happens. So I did end up pulling him off. I just was not, I knew that I could pull him up, make him go up a little bit, and hope that, that green in the circle was going to hide anything that maybe, ultimately it hid what, I needed it to hide for the background star piece. And so this way I could move him up a little bit, and then you can actually see the full sentiment. That's why I said I probably should have waited with the sentiment until I knew where everything was going to be on my card front. Yeah, hindsight is 20/20, as they say. So I just placed him back on the circle, but I made sure that he was high enough up that he's not actually, in the way of that sentiment. And I was very pleased with the end result, even if my lines did not totally line up on the backside. When I finish a craft roulette project, I always have to recap all the parameters to make sure I hit them. So a card for a dude, which ended up being for my dude. That's what his nickname has been since birth. And then, of course, I used the dark greens and blues, and then, of course, some browns in there for dragon colors, which were my color inspiration for this one. And then, of course, to get in that basket parameter, I did not so much a literal basket, but the figurative bread basket in the football. So when you throw it and you catch it right in the bread basket. And then, of course, my lines in the field with the numbers are like the chart. And if that didn't work, I also added the scoreboard chart onto the inside. And of course, I used his football numbers from JV and varsity. And so there is my craft roulette project for number 222. Go check out Merry Fun Gun and Craft Roulette. It's kind of fun to, you know, figure out how to wiggle those parameters and make them work for you. So I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day. Keep getting inky. Bye.